So, Hare Krishna devotees, welcome to our Srimad Bhagavatam session. So, I would request others to kindly go on mute. Yeah. So, welcome to Srimad Bhagavatam. A couple of weeks ago, we did Shloka number 1 of Canto 1 of Chapter 1. And we talked about how this very first shloka talks about the definition of the absolute truth. And this definition represents sambandha, which means that we have a relationship with the Supreme Lord, and we need to understand in what text, in what context that relationship exists. So there are 7 features of the Supreme Lord, of the absolute truth. One is that he is the primeval cause, which means he is the cause, and beyond him there is no other cause. So if we keep searching for who is the root, at some point you will reach the seed and there's nothing more for you to search. So he's the seed of everything. Then the second feature of the Lord is that he is all cognizant. All cognizant means he knows everything that is going on, irrespective of whether he is personally managing the universe or he has outsourced that duty and responsibility to the demigods. It does not matter. Nevertheless, the Lord is considered abhijnaha, all cognizant. And because he is the origin of everything, he is all cognizant. That also makes the Supreme Lord Swarat, fully independent. Nobody controls, with the exception of the devotees who control him with their love. And the fact that he transmits this knowledge to Lord Brahma, Tene Brahma Hridaya Ya Adi Kavaye, which means that he enlightens even the Lord of the universe, Lord Brahma. At the same time, he bewilders both the demigods and all the saints. Muhyanti yat surayaha. He is the ultimate foundation of everything, in the sense that nothing can exist in this universe without the Lord's presence. This we have repeatedly heard in Srimad Bhagavad Gita as well. And the 7th feature is that no matter how many billions and trillions of universes that he pervades through his various energies, nevertheless, the Lord is eternally existing in his supreme abode. So in summary, Sri Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is the cause of all causes. So creation, maintenance, destruction, everything is managed by him, directly or indirectly. And again, directly or indirectly, he is conscious of everything. And Prabhupada uses the example of a chief engineer who knows everything that is going on, even the most complex of projects. He's fully independent, but all the way from Lord Brahma to the most small ant called the Gopa, they're all dependent on the Supreme Lord. And the Lord himself transmits all of this knowledge to Brahma about who he is. So much so that it bewilders even the demigods and the saints who are placed into illusion. And for all the rest of us, Jivatmas, because of the effects of the 3 modes of nature, everything seems factual. And he's always residing in Golok Vrindavan, his transcendental abode, which is free from any illusion. Right? So this is a quick summary of this shloka. We're going to go back to the purport of Srila Prabhupada and complete reading the purport. There are a few more paragraphs for us to cover. So, yeah. So let's read from this paragraph. Okay, conditioned souls beginning from Brahma, who engineers the entire universe, down to the insignificant ant, are all creating, but none of them is independent of the Supreme Lord. The materialist wrongly thinks that there is no creator other than his own self. This is called Maya, or illusion. Because of his poor fund of knowledge, the materialist cannot see beyond the purview of his imperfect senses, and thus he thinks that matter automatically takes its own shape without the aid of a superior intelligence. Because we cannot see, so to speak, the hands of the Supreme Lord everywhere, a mundane person cannot see it. We assume that matter just exists on its own. Through some chemical process, it's come into being. But there is a wonderful book that Prabhupada has written that life comes from life. Life can never come from matter. Matter is inert. Matter is inferior energy. Therefore, life, which is the soul, can only come from life itself. But then, because we don't see evidence of the Supreme Lord, which means we are trying to see the entire universe through our physical eyes and not through Jnana Chakshu. So if we see it through our physical eyes, then we only see matter. We don't see any intelligence behind that matter. We don't see how even Lord Brahma is creating, how the demigods are supplying us with everything. We don't see any of that. So Prabhupada is saying that kind of thinking is actually negated or refuted in the shloka by Srila Vyasadeva. Since the complete whole or the absolute truth is the source of everything, nothing can be independent of the body of the absolute truth. Whatever happens to the body quickly becomes known to the embodied. I think last time we talked about how as long as the soul is there in the body, even a little bit of pain, Prabhupada would say that even if you get a little paper cut, I don't know how many of you have ever had a paper cut, but that paper cut can be really painful. For a couple of days, it just keeps throbbing. So because we have consciousness, we are able to experience that pain. A dead body cannot experience pain. So Prabhupada is saying whatever happens to the body quickly becomes known to the embodied. Similarly, the creation is the body of the absolute whole. Therefore, the absolute knows everything, directly and indirectly, that happens in the creation. In the Shruti mantra, it is also stated that the absolute whole of Brahman is the ultimate source of everything. Everything emanates from him, and everything is maintained by him. And at the end, everything enters into him. That is the law of nature. In the Smriti mantra, the same is confirmed. It is said that the source from which everything emanates at the beginning of Brahma's millennium, and the reservoir to which everything ultimately enters, is the absolute truth or Brahman. Material scientists take it for granted that the ultimate source of the planetary system is the sun. But they are unable to explain the source of the sun. So there are some scientists who postulate that without the sun, nothing would exist. But if the source of life and all of the other planetary systems is the sun, they're not able to answer who is the source of the sun then, who created the sun. Herein the ultimate source is explained. So in this shloka, the ultimate source is Krishna. According to the Vedic literatures, Brahma, who may be compared to the sun, is not the ultimate creator. It is stated in the shloka that Brahma was taught Vedic knowledge by the personality of Godhead. One may argue that Brahma, being the original living being, could not be inspired because there was no other living being at the time. So when Brahma came into being, there are shlokas in the Srimad Bhagavatam that says there was nothing, there was no light itself. There were no planetary systems, nothing existed. It was just space. And then the Lord imparts this knowledge to him. So who inspired Brahma to create? It was the Supreme Lord. So the supreme intelligence behind all creations is the absolute Godhead, Sri Krishna. In the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna states that it is he only who superintends the creative energy, Prakriti. Maya dhyakshe prakriti suyate sacharacharam. That's what the Lord says. She carries out his instructions, which constitutes the totality of matter. Therefore, Sri Vyasadeva does not worship Brahma, but the Supreme Lord, who guides Brahma in his creative activities. In the shloka, the particular words abhignya and swarat are significant. These two words distinguish the Supreme Lord from all other living entities. No other living entity is either abhignya or swarat, which means there is no jivatma anywhere in this universe or in any other universe that exists who is fully knowledgeable and who is independent. That is, no one is either fully cognizant or fully independent. Even Brahma has to meditate upon the Supreme Lord in order to create. After the Lord transmits this knowledge to him, what does Brahma do? Brahma is instructed to do tapas. And he does that for hundreds of years before he even has the ability to create. Then what to speak of great scientists like Einstein? The brains of such a scientist are certainly not the products of any human being. Scientists cannot manufacture such a brain. And what to speak of foolish atheists who defy the authority of the Lord? Even Mayavadi impersonalists who flatter themselves that they can become one with the Lord are neither abhignya or swarat. Such impersonalists undergo severe austerities to acquire knowledge, to become one with the Lord, which is, this moksha is, one aspect of moksha is, it is considered impersonal liberation. But ultimately, they become dependent on some rich disciple who supplies them with money to build monasteries and temples. Atheists like Ravana or Hiranyakashipu had to undergo severe penances before they could flout the authority of the Lord. So even to disobey the Lord in the most radical of ways, like Ravana and Hiranyakashipu, that intelligence, the power to do all those severe austerities, that is also supplied by the Lord only to them. That is supplied by the Lord, and they turn around and defy the Lord, claiming he doesn't exist and I am the Supreme Lord, etc. But ultimately, they were rendered helpless and could not save themselves when the Lord appeared before them as cruel death. Finished. So when the Lord kalosmi, Krishna says to Arjuna, I am time. In the Bhagavad Gita, I have come here to kill the miscreants who are adharmic. Ultimately, even the most fiercest of demoniac forces are conquered by death. The Lord just simply comes and takes their life away. This is also the case with the modern atheists who also dare to flout the authority of the Lord. Such atheists will be dealt with similarly, for history repeats itself. Meaning, Prabhupada is saying, there are many people who are proud that they don't believe in God, and they make fun of those who do believe in God. Prabhupada is saying history will repeat itself. They will see God. But how will they see God? In the form of death. Whenever men neglect the authority of the Lord, nature and her laws are there to penalize them. So if we keep flouting the Lord's instructions, then the Lord has to chastise you through Prakriti. This is confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita, in the well-known verses, Yada Yada Hi Dharmasya Glane Bhavati Bharata. Whenever there is a decline of dharma and a rise of adharma, O Arjuna, then I incarnate myself. That the Supreme Lord is all perfect is confirmed in all Shruti mantras. It is said in the Shruti mantras that the all-perfect Lord, through a glance over matter, and thus created all living beings. Simply by glancing over Prakriti, the Lord impregnates nature with the Jivatmas. It's as simple as that. The living beings are part and parcels of the Lord. And he impregnates the vast material creation with seeds of spiritual sparks. These spiritual sparks are this minute Jivatmas, souls. And thus the creative energies are set in motion to enact so many wonderful creations. An atheist may argue that God is no more expert than a watchmaker. But of course, God is greater because he can create machines in duplicate male and female forms. Prabhupada makes a phenomenal comparison here. The male and female forms of different types of machineries go on producing innumerable similar machines without God's further attention. Can man ever create a factory like this? If a man could manufacture such a set of machines that could produce other machines without his attention, then he could approach the intelligence of God. But that is not possible. For each machine has to be handled individually. To put one computer on the conveyor belt and get it ready takes so much effort. And that same effort has to be repeated for another computer and another computer, whatever it is, iPhones, you name it. So one iPhone cannot marry another iPhone and give birth to an iPhone. That's what Prabhupada is saying. Man can never replicate what the Lord has done. Therefore, no one can create as well as God. Another name for God is Asamurdhva, which means that no one is equal to or greater than him. Param Satyam, Dhimahi, I think that's how this verse ends. Or the supreme truth is he who has no equal or superior. This is confirmed in the Shruti mantras. It is said that before the creation of the material universe, there existed who? Only the Lord, who is the master of everyone. That Lord instructed Brahma in Vedic knowledge. That Lord has to be obeyed in all respects. Anyone who wants to get rid of the material entanglement must surrender to him. This is also confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita. Unless one surrenders unto the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord, it is certain that he will be bewildered. When an intelligent man surrenders unto the lotus feet of Krishna and knows completely that Krishna is the cause of all causes, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, then only can such an intelligent man become a Mahatma or great soul. But such a great soul is rarely seen. Sa Mahatma, sa Durlabha. These Mahatmas are very rare. Krishna has already said in the Bhagavad Gita. Only the Mahatmas can understand that the Supreme Lord is the primeval cause of all creations. He is Parama, or ultimate truth, because all other truths are relative to him. He is omniscient. For him, there is no illusion. Some Mayavadi scholars argue that Srimad Bhagavatam was not compiled by Srila Vyasadeva. And some of them suggest that this book is a modern creation written by someone named Vopadeva. In order to refute such meaningless arguments, Sridhara Swami points out that there is reference to the Bhagavatam in many of the oldest Puranas, This first shloka of the Bhagavatam begins with the Gayatri mantra. This first shloka is considered the Gayatri mantra. There is reference to this in the Matsya Purana, which is the oldest Purana. In that Purana, it is said, with reference to the Gayatri mantra in the Bhagavatam, that there are many narrations of spiritual instructions beginning with the Gayatri mantra. And there is the history of Vritasura. Anyone who makes a gift of this great work on a full moon day attains to the highest perfection of life by returning to Godhead. So on the occasion of Bhadra Purnima, we normally say, anybody who can gift a Srimad Bhagavatam set to someone who does not have it, they will not take birth again. So a lot of devotees will follow that. There is reference to the Bhagavatam in other Puranas also, where it is clearly stated that this work was finished in 12 cantos, which include 18,000 shlokas. In the Padma Purana also, there is reference to the Bhagavatam in a conversation between Gautama and Maharaj Ambarisha. The king was advised therein to read regularly Srimad Bhagavatam if he desired liberation from material bondage. This means Bhagavatam existed eternally. It just came out again through Narada Muni instigating Srila Vyasadeva to put it down in writing. Otherwise, the pastimes of the Lord have always existed. So the king was advised therein to read regularly Srimad Bhagavatam if he desired liberation from material bondage. Under the circumstances, there is no doubt about the authority of the Bhagavatam. Within the past 500 years, many erudite scholars and acharyas like Jiva Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, Vishwanatha Chakravarti, Vallabhacharya, and many other distinguished scholars, even after the time of Lord Chaitanya, made elaborate commentaries on the Bhagavatam, and the serious student would do well to attempt to go through them to better relish the transcendental messages. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakura specifically deals with the original and pure sex psychology, Adi Rasa, devoid of all mundane inebriety. The whole material creation is moving under the principle of sex life. In modern civilization, sex life is the focal point for all activities. Wherever one turns his face, he sees sex life predominant. Therefore, sex life is not unreal. Its reality is experienced in the spiritual world. The material sex life is but a perverted reflection of the original fact. The original fact is in the absolute truth, and thus the absolute truth cannot be impersonal. It's not possible to be impersonal and contain pure sex life. So if all of us believe that only Brahman exists and nothing exists beyond Brahman, there is no Paramatma, there is no Bhagavan, where is this concept of pure sex life? It doesn't exist. Consequently, the impersonalist philosophers have given indirect impetus to the abominable mundane sex life because they have overstressed the impersonality of the absolute truth. So Prabhupada is saying, those who don't believe that anything exists beyond Brahman, they have artificially suppressed this aspect, which also exists in the spiritual world. Consequently, man without information of the actual spiritual form of sex has accepted perverted material sex life as all in all. There is a distinction between sex life in the diseased material condition and spiritual sex life. So Prabhupada is upfront, just like Prabhupada does in Bhagavad Gita. He talks about bhakti upfront. He does not wait till the 12th chapter to tell you what bhakti is. He does not wait till the 10th chapter to tell you what Krishna is summarizing bhakti to be in the Chatushloke Gita. Similarly, because of our ignorance, Prabhupada knows that some people will go directly to 10th canto and directly to the Rasalila. The Prabhupada is bringing up that warning up front. This Srimad Bhagavatam will gradually elevate the unbiased reader to the highest perfectional stage of transcendence. It will enable him to transcend the three modes of material activities, fruitive actions, speculative philosophy, and worship of functional deities as inculcated in Vedic verses. So essentially, this particular verse has defined who the Supreme Lord is, and his 7 features have also been clearly identified and elaborated on by Srila Prabhupada. So that brings us to Shloka number 2. So we can try and recite it now. I will ask Mataji to kindly unmute herself.
Yes, Mataji.
Very
The
I will recite, you can follow me.
yes.
Dharma projita kaitavotra paramo nirmatsaranam satam.
Dharma projita kaitavotra paramo nirmatsaranam satam.
Vedyam vastavamatra vastu shivadam tapatrayon
Vedyam vastavamatra vastu sivadam tapatrayon
Srimad Bhagavate Mahamuni Krite Kim va Parairishvaraha.
Srimad Bhagavate Mahamunikrute Kim va Parairishvaraha.
Sadyo hridhyavaruddhyatetra kritibhih shushrusubhistakshanat.
Sadhyo hrudya varudhyatetra krutibhik shushrushubhistakshanat.
Okay, very good. So I will just quickly read the word-to-word meaning and the translation so we can go into the purport. But before we go to the purport, we will look at a summary slide for this second shloka. Dharmaha, religiosity. Projitha, completely rejected. Kaitavaha, covered by fruitive intention. Atra, herein. Paramaha, the highest. Nirmat Saranam, of the 100% pure in heart. Satam, devotees. Vedyam, understandable. Vastavam, factual. Atra, herein. Vastu, substance. Shivadam, well-being. Tapatraya, threefold miseries. Unmoolanam, causing uprooting of. Srimad, beautiful. Bhagavate, the Bhagavata Purana. Mahamuni, the great sage Vyasadeva. Krite, having compiled. Kim, what is? Va, the need. Paraihi, others. Ishvaraha, the Supreme Lord. Sadhyaha, at once. Hridi, within the heart. Avarudhyate, becomes compact. Atra, herein. Kritibihi, by the pious men. Shushrusubhihi, by culture. Takshanat, without delay. Translation. Completely rejecting all religious activities which are materially motivated, this Bhagavata Purana propounds the highest truth, which is understandable by those devotees who are fully pure in heart. The highest truth is reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all. Such truth uproots the threefold miseries. This beautiful Bhagavatam, compiled by the great sage Vyasadeva in his maturity, is sufficient in itself for God realization. What is the need of any other scripture? As soon as one attentively and submissively hears the message of Bhagavatam, by this culture of knowledge, the Supreme Lord is established within his heart. So in this particular verse, we're going to look at the abhidheya feature or the principle. So the first verse we said is sambandha. So now we're going to look at what is this particular verse specifically talking about. In reality, this verse is glorifying Srimad Bhagavatam itself. And why? For those who are ready to really step into the realm of pure love of Godhead, or at least approach that path, you don't need to read any other book. This book alone is sufficient. So let's look at a single slider and then we will read the summary. So the second shloka glorifies the Srimad Bhagavatam and also actual religion. So dharma projita kaitava. Kaitava means cheating religion. So in the very first sentence, Vyasadeva is saying, this purusharthas that all of us are familiar with, dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. Even moksha is a material desire. It's a material motivation. Because you want to just be free from anxiety. You want to be free from troubles. So in the very first line, Srila Vyasadeva is saying, all other religions that are propagated in the Vedas are cheating religion. Because they don't speak about the highest truth. But the Srimad Bhagavatam, by itself, propagates that highest truth, which is love of God. But the Srimad Bhagavatam can only be relished, appreciated, absorbed, imbibed, practiced, the message by those who are devotees of the Lord. The Srimad Bhagavatam will not attract the attention of atheists, will not attract the attention of the impersonalists, will not attract the attention of materialistic people. Because to understand the Bhagavatam, to relish the Bhagavatam, one needs to have purity in the heart. What does this non-enviousness mean? This non-enviousness means we are not envious that Krishna is the Supreme Lord and wish that we were just like him. And this Srimad Bhagavatam, this literature by itself, it distinguishes the highest reality from illusion, and it does so for the welfare of everyone. By reading the Srimad Bhagavatam and by hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam, the threefold miseries, Adhyatmik, Adhibhautik, and Adidaivik, are all uprooted. So what does this mean? It is not that if you read the Bhagavatam, your problems in life will be stopped. The challenges that you're experiencing is suddenly going to just disappear. We are in the material universe. We're not in the spiritual world. So we will continue to experience duality of happiness and distress, happiness and distress. So what does this mean when this particular shloka is saying it uproots the threefold miseries? It simply means that by getting absorbed in Srimad Bhagavatam on the pastimes of the Lord and the pastimes of great devotees of the Lord, you do not put much focus on the dualities that you're experiencing. You just take it in stride. One of the words that the Lord uses in the Bhagavad Gita, which is translated in English as equanimity. If good things come, you accept it. If bad things come, you accept it. It's not that if good things come, you accept it. If bad things come, you want to reject it and try and distance yourself from it. So it uproots the threefold miseries, means it gives you the strength to deal with the challenges that we experience in this world. It does not mean that your challenges are going to disappear just because you are a devotee. We have to live out the rest of our life as per whatever residual karma we have come with. We have to experience that. So this has been compiled by Vedavyas, and this one book is alone for you to attain Krishna Prema. We don't need any other scripture, this particular shloka is saying. So you don't need all of the other Vedic scriptures. You just need the message of God in the form of Srimad Bhagavad Gita and the pastimes of the Lord in the form of Srimad Bhagavatam to get to that platform of pure love of God. It reminds me of how Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Gadadhar Pandit would sit in the Tota Gopinath temple in Puri and read Canto 7 again and again and again and again. They were just relishing Prahlad Maharaj's pastimes over and over again. 108 times it was read. So much so the tears that fell from their eyes simply wiped out the writings on the palms. So this book is only meant for devotees of the Lord. Yeah, because nobody else can relish it. The Supreme Lord is established within his heart at once. As soon as one attentively and submissively hears Srimad Bhagavatam. It reminds you of the instruction of the Lord in chapter 4 of the Bhagavad Gita, where the Lord says that one should accept a guru, should serve him submissively, should inquire from him in a very humble mood. So the same principle is spoken about here. Who do you hear from? You have to hear from an exalted personality. You have to hear from the lips of an acharya. You have to hear from the lips of another devotee. So Prabhupada frequently says, we shouldn't hear Srimad Bhagavatam from those who recite the Bhagavatam or narrate the pastimes of the Lord in order to make a living. Because then their mood is of wanting to earn money and not necessarily to relish the pastimes as they recite it. So the purport is relatively short compared to the first shloka. So we can go through the purport. So completely just remembering the translation again. Completely rejecting all religious activities which are materially motivated, this Bhagavata Purana propounds the highest truth, which is understandable by those devotees who are fully pure in heart. The highest truth is reality, distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all. Such truth uproots the threefold miseries. This beautiful Bhagavatam, compiled by the great sage Vyasadeva in his maturity, is sufficient in itself for God realization. What is the need of any other scripture? As soon as one attentively and submissively hears the message of Bhagavatam, by this culture of knowledge, the Supreme Lord is established within his heart. So Prabhupada is going to talk in sequence of the key messages in this particular shloka. Religion includes 4 primary subjects, namely pious activities, economic development, satisfaction of the senses, and finally liberation from material bondage, which is dharma, artha, kama, moksha. Irreligious life is a barbarous condition. Indeed, human life begins when religion begins. Eating, sleeping, fearing, and mating are the 4 principles of animal life. These are common both to the animals and to human beings, but religion is the extra function of the human being. Without religion, human life is no better than animal life. Therefore, in human societies, there is some form of religion which aims at self-realization and which makes a reference to man's eternal relationship with God. So unless a human being is practicing religion, he is leading an animal life. He's just as barbaric as the animal. It's just everything else is done in a more sophisticated manner, that's all. In the lower stages of human civilization, there is always competition to lord it over the material nature. Or in other words, there is a continuous rivalry to satisfy the senses. You know, yesterday when we were in the temple and we were talking about what's the difference between religion and spirituality, we had one slide where we were talking about how 80% of the Vedic scriptures actually have to do with karma kanda. And we were discussing, why is that so? That the Upasana Kanda and the Bhakti Kanda and the Jnana Kanda make up only for 20% of the Vedas. Why is there so much information given on how to satisfy all kinds of material desires? And that's what Prabhupada is talking about here. In the lower stages of human civilization, there is always competition to lord it over material nature, or in other words, there is a continuous rivalry to satisfy the senses. Driven by such consciousness, man turns to religion. So the progression is that you practice some religion, and based on certain principles and regulations and a regulated life, you can earn money, you can earn a living, and based on earned living, you can try and satisfy your desires. But at some point, you will reject all of these desires as just being an endless set of trying to be happy, but realizing that nothing ever makes you happy eternally. And then you may go in search of moksha. That's when you turn to religion. He thus performs pious activities or religious functions in order to gain something material. But if such material gains are obtainable in other ways, then so-called religion is neglected, which means people who have a fear of not getting something that they want, they will worship, do all the right things to get what they want. But what if you can get what you want without even worshipping? Then why would you even worry about religion? So Prabhupada is saying that is why in Kali Yuga, so many people reject religion, because they can get everything else. Without having worshipped a demigod, you can be a billionaire. So this is the situation in modern civilization. Man is thriving economically. So at present, he is not very interested in religion. Imagine Prabhupada is writing this in the 70s. So when all the comforts are provided for you, why would you be interested in religion? Yesterday, as a matter of fact, I was having a conversation with a senior devotee in the temple, and we were just talking about Janmashtami. And generally, ISKCON will try to conduct programs in locations where the congregation is present in significant numbers. And apartment complexes, and very large apartment complexes like the one that I live in, are an ideal ground for us to host some Janmashtami celebration. So during this conversation, we were talking about, Prabhu was talking about his experiences in another very large apartment complex. Large means large. We're talking about more than 2,500 flats. Large. It's like a little city in itself. And we got to talking about how Prabhu has conducted Janmashtami programs in a neighboring large apartment complex for the last 4 years. And barely there are 10 devotees attending classes. And we were just discussing that it is far more difficult for us to preach in large apartment complexes, although I have not tried it. Prabhu has had experience, because people are in a comfort zone. When you are living in a very posh apartment complex, it means you have everything. You have all the comforts. Therefore, religion just becomes an activity, a fun exercise. It's a social outing. It's a social gathering. It's something to have fun. So it is so interesting that Prabhupada is writing the same thing here that we were discussing. That if material gains are obtainable in other ways, then so-called religion is neglected. Then religion, the way communities look at religion, is a very superficial activity. For example, I'm sure all of you know, when Ganesh Chaturthi is celebrated, do you think they play religious songs? For many years, I have observed, at least in the communities that I have been in, all kinds of pandals will go up with Lord Ganesha very nicely installed. I don't know if I should call it installed, kept there, I should say. And all kinds of filmy music will be played throughout the day. This is what religion has become for us. It's become very cheap. So Prabhupada is complaining that this is what is happening in modern civilization, that man is thriving economically. So at present, he is not very interested in religion. Churches, mosques, or temples are now practically vacant. Thank the Lord, Giridhari, our temple is not vacant. It's very, very busy all the time. Men are more interested in factories, shops, and cinemas than in religious places, which were erected by their forefathers. You go to any mall, it'll be crowded. Go to IKEA, you can shop till you drop dead. So this practically proves that religion is performed for some economic gains. That means Prabhupada is saying, even if somebody is quote unquote religious, they're doing it to get something in return. Why do you want economic returns? Because you need to satisfy your senses. So economic gains are needed for sense gratification. Often, when one is baffled in the pursuit of sense gratification, he takes to salvation and tries to become one with the Supreme Lord. It's only when you get frustrated, you think, oh, I must go search something else. Consequently, all these states are simply different types of sense gratification, which means dharma is sense gratification, artha is sense gratification, kama is sense gratification, moksha is also sense gratification, because when you get fed up with everything and you want relief from the miseries of life, you go in search of moksha because you want to put an end to your miseries. So even that is done to satisfy you. Moksha is also desired to satisfy you. That's why bhakti is so sublime. Bhakti is not about satisfying ourselves. Bhakti is about serving the Lord and satisfying the Lord. In the Vedas, the above mentioned 4 activities, dharma, artha, kama, moksha, are prescribed in the regulative way so that there will not be any undue competition for sense gratification. In the sense, if you follow the regulated way of getting what you want, to fulfilling your desires, then you will not become too greedy. It will not set off competition among jivatmas. Who can get the most? But Srimad Bhagavatam is transcendental to all these sensory gratificatory activities. It is purely transcendental literature, which can be understood only by the pure devotees of the Lord, who are transcendental to competitive sense gratification. In the material world, there is keen competition between animal and animal, man and man, community and community, nation and nation. We are seeing this playing out every day. If there is a lot of oil in one country, they think that oil is their God-given property. They don't even realize that that doesn't belong to them. What did they do to put the oil deep inside the earth? Did they do anything? Nothing. They just got lucky that they happened to be residents of that land. But over that oil, so many wars are being fought. But the devotees of the Lord rise above such competitions. They do not compete with the materialist because they are on the path back to Godhead, where life is eternal and blissful. So Prabhupada is writing, once you've come to this realization that actually this life, there's nothing to be gained by constantly chasing things. Once you've come to that understanding and realization, then you stop this competitive mood. I want to accumulate more, or whatever it is that we are all chasing. Prabhupada said, such transcendentalists are non-envious and pure in heart. In the material world, everyone is envious of everyone else, and therefore there is competition. But the transcendental devotees of the Lord are not only free from material envy, but are well-wishers to everyone, and they strive to establish a competitionless society with God in the center. So Prabhupada is drawing a stark contrast between those who are chasing things, material things, and those who are wanting to keep Krishna the center of everything. The contemporary socialist conception of a competitionless society is artificial. Because in the socialist state, there is competition for the post of the dictator. Prabhupada is just brilliant. He says, even in so-called socialist states, some of our states consider them, some of our states in India are led by socialist parties. But Prabhupada says, even there is a competition to occupy that chief post of chief minister or whatever, president. From the point of view of the Vedas or from the point of view of common human activities, sense gratification is the basis of material life. Materialism means you just want to satisfy your five senses. There are three paths mentioned in the Vedas. One involves fruitive activities to gain promotion to better planets, which means some people think, I want to increase my enjoyment. Whatever I'm having here is not sufficient. So they will do all of these pujas, vujas, everything else, just so they can go to the upper planetary systems and enjoy themselves even more than what they have enjoyed here. Another involves worshipping different demigods for promotion to the planets of the demigods. And another involves realizing the absolute truth and his impersonal feature and becoming one with him. And Prabhupada says all three are material. None of this is spiritual. The impersonal aspect of the absolute truth is not the highest. Above the impersonal feature is the Paramatma feature, and above this is the personal feature of the absolute truth, or Bhagavan. Srimad Bhagavatam gives information about the absolute truth in his personal feature. It is higher than impersonalist literatures and higher than the Jnana-kanda division of the Vedas. It is even higher than the Karma-kanda division, and even higher than the Upasana-kanda division, because it recommends the worship of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Shri Krishna. In the Karma-kanda, so these are the three divisions and three goals that people aspire for: Jnana-kanda, Upasana-kanda, and Karma-kanda, depending on what your area of interest is. But then, higher than all these three is Bhakti Yoga, which tells you to worship the Supreme Lord and try to please him. In the Karma Kanda, there is competition to reach heavenly planets for better sense gratification. And there is similar competition in the Jnana Kanda and the Upasana Kanda. So ultimately, the competitive mood has not expired in any of these three paths. Only in the path of bhakti, there's no competition, because you are simply surrendered to the Lord and saying, I'm ready to be your servant and your servant. I'm ready to serve. So where is there competitive mood? The Srimad Bhagavatam is superior to all of these because it aims at the supreme truth, which is the substance or the root of all categories. From the Srimad Bhagavatam, one can come to know the substance as well as the categories. The substance is the absolute truth, the Supreme Lord, and all emanations are relative forms of energy. So everything that the Lord has created is his energy. That's all. He is the Adi Purusha. Nothing is apart from the substance, but at the same time, the energies are different from the substance. This concept is not contradictory. Srimad Bhagavatam explicitly promulgates this simultaneously one and different philosophy of the Vedanta Sutra, which begins with Janma Yasya Yataha. That is that sutra. This knowledge that the energy of the Lord is simultaneously one with and different from the Lord is an answer to the mental speculators' attempt to establish the energy as the absolute. So the energetic and the energy can never be separated. When this knowledge is factually understood, one sees the conceptions of monism and dualism to be imperfect. Monism means we are all one. Dualism means we are all different. So both of these are incomplete understandings. Development of this transcendental consciousness grounded in the conception of simultaneously one and different leads one immediately to the stage of freedom from the threefold miseries. The threefold miseries are those miseries which arise from the mind and body, adhyatmika, those miseries inflicted by other living beings, adi bhautika, and those miseries arising from the natural catastrophes over which one has no control, adi daivika. Srimad Bhagavatam begins with a surrender of the devotee unto the absolute person. The devotee is fully aware that he is one with the absolute, and at the same time in the eternal position of servant to the absolute. In the material conception, one falsely thinks himself the Lord of all he surveys, and therefore he is always troubled by the threefold miseries of life. But as soon as one comes to know his real position as transcendental servant, he at once becomes free from all miseries. As long as the living entity is trying to master material nature, there is no possibility of his becoming servant of the Supreme. If you're so busy trying to dominate Prakriti, where is there time for you to become servant of the Supreme Lord? That's what Prabhupada is asking. That idea of wanting to be servant never enters your mind because you're too busy in the conquering mood. Service to the Lord is rendered in pure consciousness of one's spiritual identity. By service, one is immediately freed from material encumbrances. Over and above this, Srimad Bhagavatam is a personal commentation on the Vedanta Sutra by Sri Vyasadeva. So the Vedanta Sutras are considered to be the epitome of all Vedic scriptures, and therefore all the Sampradayas have written commentary on the Vedanta Sutra. And it was pointed out to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that this Gaudiya Madhva Sampradaya has not commented on the Vedanta Sutra. And Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, there's no need for us to write a commentary on the Vedanta Sutra because Srimad Bhagavatam is the commentary on the Vedanta Sutra. This Achintya Veda Abheda Tattva is perfectly described, elucidated in Srimad Bhagavatam. There's no need for us to write commentary. Of course, later on, a commentary was written by one of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's in the disciplic succession. It was written later on. It was written in the maturity of his spiritual life through the mercy of Narada. Srila Vyasadeva is the authorized incarnation of Narayana, the personality of Godhead. So, Vyasadeva is considered a Shaktiavesh incarnation of the Lord for the sole purposes of bringing this scripture to the masses in Kali Yuga. Therefore, there is no question as to his authority. He is the author of all other Vedic literatures. Yet he recommends, please understand these first three shlokas are written by Vyasadeva himself. Vyasadeva himself is recommending in this shloka, why do you want to read any other book except the Bhagavatam? Yet he recommends the study of Srimad Bhagavatam above all others. In other Puranas, there are different methods set forth by which one can worship the demigods. But in the Bhagavatam, only the Supreme Lord is mentioned. So throughout the Bhagavatam, there is no shloka that tells you to go worship somebody else. This Srimad Bhagavatam is exclusively to worship Lord Vishnu or Lord Krishna. And Vyasadeva is saying, what better literature can you have in your hands than this? You don't need anything else because you're in direct connection with the Lord. But in the Bhagavatam, only the Supreme Lord is mentioned. The Supreme Lord is the total body, and the demigods are the different parts of that body. Consequently, by worshipping the Supreme Lord, one does not need to worship the demigods. The Supreme Lord becomes fixed in the heart of the devotee immediately. That's what happens when you read the Srimad Bhagavatam or hear the Srimad Bhagavatam. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has recommended the Srimad Bhagavatam as a spotless Purana and distinguishes it from all other Puranas. I was listening to a lecture by His Holiness Bhakti Rasamrita Maharaj this morning, and the title of the lecture was so interesting that I clicked play and I was listening to it this morning. The title of the lecture was How to Maintain Vrindavan Consciousness All the Time. That was the title of the lecture. So not everybody is fortunate to go and live in Vrindavan. So if you're not in Vrindavan, but you want to maintain that mood of Vrindavan, Krishna consciousness all the time, how do you do it? And Maharaj was beautifully explaining using Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu Smaranam. That Prahlad Maharaj says it all begins with hearing, but it doesn't stop with hearing. Kirtanam, what you've heard, you have to repeat again and again and again, because only then, Maharaj was saying how there is a plumbing leakage with two ear holes on both sides. Whatever we hear just leaks out. And therefore, in between, there is nothing. Therefore, for all of us, the instruction Maharaj was giving is that it's not just listening endlessly to lectures, although it is very nice, it's very beautiful, but we have to repeat what we heard. We have to take down notes. We have to go over. We have to contemplate. Only then can smaranam happen. Which means Shravanam, Kirtanam, if you do both of it together, then smaranam, you can always remember the Supreme Lord. Otherwise, every time we hear a pastime, after 2 days, we have forgotten it. So in order, real relishment comes not just from hearing, but from also doing kirtanam. Kirtanam doesn't only mean doing bhajans or Harinam Sankirtan. Sankirtan includes the words of repeating the Bhagavad Gita, understanding it, discussing it among sadhu sangha. Only then smaranam can happen. So Shravanam, Kirtanam go together. That leads to smaranam. The proper method for receiving this transcendental message is to hear it submissively. A challenging attitude cannot help one realize this transcendental message. One particular word is used herein for proper guidance. This word is shushru. One must be anxious to hear this transcendental message. The desire to sincerely hear is the first qualification. So there are 25 of us here on this call. I'm assuming each one of us is exemplifying this. We are eager to hear this. Hence, even after more than an hour class, we are still here. So the desire to sincerely hear is the first qualification to become a devotee of the Lord. Less fortunate persons are not at all interested in hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam. The process is simple, but the application is difficult. Unfortunate people find enough time to hear idle social and political conversations, but when invited to attend a meeting of devotees to hear Srimad Bhagavatam, they suddenly become reluctant. I'm sure every person here, every devotee here who's ever attempted to preach and talk to their family members or friends or neighbors, you get along so well with them. But when you invite them for Bhagavad Gita class or Bhagavatam class, suddenly they don't have time. I'm very busy. So please consider yourself very fortunate that you are here listening to Srimad Bhagavatam, because not everybody has this taste. Sometimes professional readers of the Bhagavatam immediately plunge into the confidential topics of the pastimes of the Supreme Lord, which they seemingly interpret as sex literature. Srimad Bhagavatam is meant to be heard from the beginning. Those who are fit to assimilate this work are mentioned in the shloka. One becomes qualified to hear Srimad Bhagavatam after many pious deeds. The intelligent person with thoughtful discretion can be assured by the great sage Vyasadeva that he can realize the Supreme Personality directly by hearing Srimad Bhagavatam. Srila Vyasadeva himself is giving you an assurance that just by hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, you can realize who Lord Krishna is. Without undergoing the different stages of realization set forth in the Vedas, one can be lifted immediately to the position of Paramahamsa simply by agreeing to receive this message. So we don't have to go through the laborious, tedious process of many, many lifetimes of graduating to that level until you achieve that stature of being liberated. So this shloka clearly states that we don't need supreme intelligence. We don't need high IQ. We just need desire to hear the Srimad Bhagavatam. And especially hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam from the lips of a pure devotee like Srila Prabhupada, we can make rapid progress on this path of bhakti. So the only qualification is that you have an eagerness to hear. But that hearing has to be supplemented by kirtanam, and that leads to smaranam. So we will look at the third shloka next week.